Imagine being punished not for what you did, but for what you looked like. In the brutal world of ancient Rome, beauty could be a curse, and resemblance could be a death sentence. This is a haunting story of Sporus, a young slave whose only crime was looking too much like the woman Emperor Nero could not live without, a woman he had murdered with his own hands. What began as grief soon turned into obsession, and obsession became one of the most disturbing love stories in history, where love, power, and madness blurred into something unspeakable. The Roman Empire in the 1st century was a place of unrestrained power. One man's emotions could determine the fate of thousands. Nero Claudius Caesar, the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors, ruled over it all. To the people, he was unpredictable, a man of charm and horror, capable of music and murder in the same breath. He fancied himself an artist, a poet, even a god. But beneath that golden crown was a mind unraveling. And it was the death of one woman, his beloved wife Poppaea Sabina, that sent him spiraling into madness. Poppaea was not an ordinary Roman woman. She was a kind of beauty that rewrote destinies. Golden-haired, cunning, and dangerously ambitious, she knew how to turn desire into power. She had already been married twice before Nero set his eyes on her, once to a nobleman and once to Otho, one of Nero's closest friends. But friendship meant nothing to an emperor. When Nero wanted something, or someone, he took it. Otho was exiled, and Poppaea became empress. For 5 years, she ruled Nero's heart completely. She whispered into his ear, shaped his decisions, and pushed away anyone who threatened her influence. Even Nero's own mother, Agrippina, was not safe. Their relationship was not love as we know it. It was obsession wrapped in silk, passion soaked in fear. Poppaea was the only person who could calm Nero's rages, the only one he seemed to listen to. But she also knew exactly how to provoke him. And in the summer of 65 AD, that knowledge became fatal. While heavily pregnant, she made the mistake of criticizing Nero for coming home late from the races. The emperor, drunk and furious, lashed out. With one brutal kick to her stomach, he ended both her life and the life of their unborn child. The palace went silent. Rome lost its empress. Nero lost his sanity. He had destroyed the only person he ever truly loved. The guilt consumed him. For days, he refused to eat or speak. He ordered her body embalmed with the finest spices and treated her like a goddess. Massive games were held in her honor. But the truth was, no ritual could cleanse what he had done. Nero's grief twisted into something darker, a desperate attempt to bring her back, no matter the cost. Weeks turned into months, and the emperor's behavior grew more erratic. He searched for women who looked like Poppaea. He sent servants across the empire to find a reflection in someone else's face. None were perfect enough. Their hair was too dark. Their eyes were too small. Their voices lacked their softness. Nero wanted an exact copy of his lost love, as if recreating her could undo his crime. But Rome offered no such miracle. Until one day, fate or cruelty answered his wish in the form of a boy. Sporus was young, beautiful, and enslaved. His features were delicate, his skin smooth, his hair a shimmering gold that caught the light like Poppaea's once had. He had the misfortune of being noticed. When Nero saw him, he froze. The emperor's eyes widened, his grief and madness colliding in a single moment of recognition. This boy, this fragile slave, looked almost exactly like the woman he had killed. Nero's mind twisted the resemblance into destiny. He believed Poppaea had returned to him, not in spirit, but in flesh. Sporus's life ended the moment Nero's gaze fell upon him. There would be no escape, no mercy. The emperor summoned him to the palace. The walls were covered in gold, the air heavy with incense, and Sporus stood trembling, unaware of what fate awaited him. Nero circled him like a predator studying prey, his eyes bright with emotion that could not be named. He smiled, not with kindness, but with madness. "You will make her live again," he said softly. And with that, the young slave's nightmare began. Nero ordered his physicians to prepare Sporus for what he called a divine transformation. In truth, it was mutilation. The boy was to be castrated, stripped of his manhood, reshaped into Nero's fantasy, not as punishment, but as an offering to the memory of Poppaea. It was one of the cruelest acts in Roman history, an emperor using another human being's body as a vessel for his grief. The procedure was agonizing. In ancient Rome, such operations were done without anesthesia, often with crude instruments. Many died from infection or blood loss. But Sporus survived because Nero's obsession demanded it. Once healed, the emperor dressed him in silk gowns, adorned with jewels, and even gave him the same hairstyles and perfumes Poppaea had worn. Sporus's identity was erased. He was no longer a person. He was an imitation, a ghost molded into flesh. Then came the ultimate humiliation. Nero declared that he would marry Sporus. The Roman elite gathered, too afraid to protest. The emperor wore the toga of a groom. Sporus was dressed as a bride, veiled in gold and crimson. They exchanged vows before the gods. The empire watched as their ruler married a castrated slave boy dressed as his dead wife. No one dared laugh. No one dared look away. For Sporus, the ceremony was not a wedding. It was a burial. The last trace of who he had been was gone. From that moment forward, he would live as Poppaea's reflection, chained to the madness of a man who confused love with possession. Nero paraded him through the streets, calling him Lady Poppaea, introducing him as his empress. Some whispered in disgust. Others pitied the boy. But everyone understood one thing. When an emperor's grief turned to obsession, even reality itself could be rewritten. In the dim corridors of the palace, Sporus learned to move like a shadow. He mimicked Poppaea's gestures, her smile, her voice, because survival depended on it. Every glance from Nero could mean life or death. He ate from golden plates, slept on silk sheets, and lived in terror. At night, when the emperor whispered to him as if speaking to his lost wife, Sporus stared at the ceiling and wondered if the gods had forgotten him. By day, Rome still roared outside the palace gates. The chariot races continued. Senators schemed and soldiers marched. But behind those marble walls, one boy lived a life that defied imagination, a living monument to grief, beauty, and cruelty. The corridors of the imperial palace were whispering that night. Servants scurried past marble pillars, eyes lowered, carrying gold trays of fruit and wine for the emperor who could not sleep. In the middle of this lavish loneliness sat Nero, pale, haunted, and drunk on memory. The memory of Poppaea, the woman he had loved, the woman he had killed. Poppaea's death had left a hollow echo in Nero's heart. She had been beautiful, cunning, and cruelly ambitious. But when her words angered the emperor one night, he struck her in rage, and her unborn child, his heir, died with her. Rome mourned, Nero wept. And then the madness began. Weeks passed, and the emperor could not bear the emptiness beside him on the silk sheets. The whispers said he wandered the palace halls calling her name, his fingers trailing across her jewels, her dresses, her perfume bottles, desperate for something that still carried her. But nothing was enough, until one day, a servant brought before him a young boy. His name was Sporus, barely 16, delicate, with almond-shaped eyes and a quiet grace that made the courtiers stare. When Nero saw him, he froze. His breath caught as if a ghost had appeared before him. The resemblance to Poppaea was uncanny. The shape of his lips, the tilt of his chin, even the way he moved seemed like her shadow. Nero rose slowly from his seat, circling the trembling youth like a predator studying prey. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Sporus," the boy whispered, head bowed. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Nero smiled, a slow, cold smile that made everyone watching shiver. "Sporus," he repeated, "you shall never leave my sight again." No one dared to speak. No one dared to question the emperor's command. That night, Nero summoned his physicians. What followed was one of the cruelest acts in Roman history. The emperor ordered the boy to be castrated. The reason? So that his voice would never deepen, his body would never change. He would remain soft, delicate, and eternal, just like Poppaea. The doctors obeyed. Rome obeyed. Sporus had no choice. When the deed was done, Nero clothed him in silk gowns, adorned him with jewels, and paraded him before the court as Lady Poppaea. The senators bowed, trembling. The empress was reborn, or so Nero claimed. In the months that followed, the palace transformed into a theater of delusion. Nero hosted banquets where Sporus sat beside him, wearing Poppaea's crown. He even kissed the boy's hand before the nobles whispering her name. Some said he had lost his mind entirely. Others said this was grief turned to madness. But no one dared to call it what it truly was: the emperor's obsession with control over love, death, and destiny itself. The Romans watched in horrified fascination. When Nero announced his marriage to Sporus, the empire held its breath. In a public ceremony, Sporus was dressed as a bride, veiled and adorned in pearls. The imperial priests blessed their union, and the crowd was forced to cheer. Nero called himself the groom, and Sporus the empress. Behind the laughter and the spectacle, the boy's eyes remained distant, hollow, and afraid. But Nero was intoxicated with the illusion he had created. He began addressing Sporus as Poppaea in private. He spoke to him as though the real Poppaea had returned from death. He gifted him villas, slaves, and chariots. Yet the boy was still a prisoner, bound not by chains, but by the emperor's madness. Whispers spread across Rome like wildfire. Some said Nero had found a way to cheat death. Others said the gods would strike him down for blasphemy. But the emperor did not care. In his mind, he had conquered grief. He had reshaped reality itself. Still, there were moments when cracks showed. Late at night, when the torches burned low and music faded, Nero would stare into Sporus's face, searching, desperate, as if expecting Poppaea's soul to speak through him. But it never did, and the silence that followed drove him deeper into despair. By the second year of their marriage, the empire began to crumble. Rebellions flared in the provinces. The Senate grew restless, and Rome itself began to turn against its emperor. But Nero clung to Sporus, his living illusion, even as the world around him fell apart. He took him on grand tours of Greece, where crowds watched in confusion as the empress accompanied the emperor, delicate and wordless. Behind closed doors, Sporus played the role expected of him, smiling, silent, pretending to love the man who had destroyed his life. And yet, some said Sporus learned how to survive through silence. He became careful with his words, calculated with his expressions. When Nero raged, he soothed him. When he wept, he comforted him. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps, deep within that broken boy, was a spark of intelligence, a will to live long enough to see the tyrant fall. Because the day would come, sooner than anyone expected, when the empire that had worshipped Nero would turn its sword against him. And when that day came, the boy who had been forced to become a queen would witness the end of the emperor, who thought he could resurrect love by destroying it. The end came quietly, almost pitifully, for a man who once ruled the world. Nero's empire had turned to ash. The Senate declared him an enemy of Rome. His guards abandoned him. Even the citizens who once cheered his name now spat at it. In a dim villa outside the city, Nero hid with only a few loyal servants and Sporus. The same boy he had destroyed, remade, and paraded as a ghost of love now sat beside him as the world closed in. Nero paced the room, muttering to himself. His golden robe was torn, his face unshaven, eyes wild. "They want my crown, my blood," he whispered, "but I am still emperor. I am still divine." Then, turning suddenly to Sporus, his voice softened. "You will stay with me, will you not? You will not leave me like the rest." Sporus nodded, though his eyes betrayed no emotion. He had long learned the danger of truth. Outside, the sound of galloping hooves grew louder. Soldiers were coming. The end was near. Nero trembled, clutching a dagger. "Rome will remember me," he shouted. But then his voice cracked. "Sporus, do not let them take me alive." And in that chilling moment, he ordered the boy, the same boy he had mutilated, crowned, and married, to prepare for his death. Nero, terrified of humiliation, could not bear the thought of facing the mob. "Be brave, my Poppaea," he said, using her name one last time. "We shall meet in the afterlife." But Sporus did nothing. He simply stared, unmoving, as the emperor took his own life. When Nero's body fell, the boy did not scream, did not cry. He only stood in silence, watching the emperor of Rome die, like a frightened man. The empire celebrated. The tyrant was gone. But Sporus's nightmare was not over. After Nero's death, the boy, now barely 17, was passed from one powerful man to another like a trophy. His beauty and the twisted fame of being Nero's wife made him both a prize and a curse. The general Otho, once a rival of Nero's, took Sporus as his companion, parading him at feasts as if claiming victory over his fallen emperor. But when Otho's rule collapsed within months, Sporus fell again into the hands of Vitellius, the next emperor. And what Vitellius planned was far worse. The new emperor, drunk on cruelty, decided to mock Nero's memory in the most humiliating way. He ordered that Sporus be dressed as a bride once again, this time for a grotesque public spectacle in the arena. Before thousands of Romans, he was to be paraded as the empress, and then violated in a mock ceremony to symbolize Nero's downfall. When Sporus learned what awaited him, he said nothing. But that night, he asked for a quiet corner to himself. There, with the same calm he had shown all his life, he took his own life before the guards could stop him. And so, the boy who had been forced to live as a woman, who had been crowned and broken, died on his own terms, his silence becoming his final rebellion. The story of Sporus is one of the most haunting in Roman history, not just for its cruelty, but for what it reveals about power, obsession, and the way grief can rot the soul of even the most powerful. Nero believed he could command love the same way he commanded legions, through force, fear, and fantasy. But love cannot be ordered, and the more he tried to resurrect Poppaea through Sporus, the deeper he sank into madness. Historians still debate what Sporus felt. Was he a victim crushed by imperial power, or a survivor who learned how to live among monsters until he could escape them? Perhaps both. What is certain is that he became the mirror in which Nero's insanity reflected, a living symbol of what happens when love becomes possession, when grief turns to tyranny. Even centuries later, his name echoes through history books, a shadow among emperors and gods. The boy who was made to wear a crown he never wanted. The boy who played the role of an empress in a play written by madness. And in the ruins of ancient Rome, among the broken statues and forgotten halls, his story still whispers, not glory or conquest, but a quiet pain behind power, of what happens when an emperor loses his humanity and forces another to lose his own. Sporus never asked to resemble a dead woman. He never asked for a crown or a husband or a stage. But history gave him all three, and then took everything else away. In the end, perhaps the cruelest truth is this. While Nero's name became a symbol of tyranny, it was Sporus, the nameless boy, who carried the true weight of Rome's madness. And through the centuries, when the world speaks of emperors and empires, his silent shadow lingers behind every throne, a reminder that the greatest tragedies in history are not always written in war, but in the hearts of those forced to live someone else's dream.